And very briefly, I thought I'd just introduce you to the panelists. So immediately next to me is Adi Verma from OSN. Adi manages OSN's IP and anti-piracy functions here in the UAE, but not just for the UAE in this region, but through to India as well. And as will come out of this panel, I think there are a number of successes that OSN have had, including jail time for a number of people. Prior to work with OSN, Adi's worked in private practice in India as well as the UAE. Next to Adi is Amit Naik from Naik and Naik. Amit is widely regarded as one of India's premier entertainment lawyers. He started his firm in 2004 to plug the gap in entertainment law that he saw in India. Amit and his firm act for both Hollywood, Bollywood, broadcasters, content providers and entertainment stars from around the world for their rights in India and elsewhere. And he's also contributed to a number of laws to try and bring forward change and reform in India, including the copyright law in 2012. Next to Amit is Nikki Schroeder from Discovery. Nikki is a UK qualified solicitor and has held a number of positions with ITV prior to joining Discovery earlier this year, where she heads the global anti-piracy team, looking at the anti-piracy priorities and enforcement actions for 29 network brands across 170 countries. So it really is a challenging portfolio Nikki's responsible for. And again, similar to Adi, prior to working in-house, she worked in private practice at a law firm in the UK. And last but not least is Waleed Abdul Mohsen from Rotana. Waleed, again, similar to Adi, looks to stop infringing content, particularly Arabic content that's been infringed online and through streaming. He's also looking at, which was touched on by his colleague a little earlier in the last panel, to centralize the authentication process for Arabic content to try and overcome the issues of splitting ownership of negatives from IP rights. And I think that, again, that's something we'll touch on a little later, as was foreseen by Waleed's colleague a little earlier. So I think generally we can all agree it's been a busy year for broadcasters and rights holders. So technologies continue to evolve. As we've already heard a few times today, more often than not, the pirates are ahead of us, but let's hope we can all catch up and put them on the back foot for once. We've also heard in recent weeks a number of different legitimate streaming services about to come online, such as Apple TV+, Discovery as well, looking to launch in 2020, Disney, and also Warner Brothers, amongst many others. So there's going to be more legitimate streaming sites out there, which no doubt will mean even more anti-piracy efforts needed. In terms of stopping the piracy, we've seen significant prison sentences handed down. So you would have seen a few months ago in the UK 3 criminals, let's not call them people, let's call them criminals because that's what they are, were sentenced for a total of 17 years due to the sale of illegal set-top boxes. In the UAE earlier this year, just a few weeks ago, OSN also had a jail term for a person selling illegal set-top boxes, as well as a jail term. There were fines, there was compensation, and it also led to the closure of their business. What more could you want? It's almost the full results, no doubt, OSN and other rights holders would want in such circumstances. But it's also been a year where we've seen reports of broadcasters saying that they will reduce spend on content unless the rights holders are proving to them that they are taking action. So the actual broadcasters themselves are looking to bring back on their spend to try and make sure that everybody is looking to work together and fight together in this battle. So we'll look at some of the legal challenges and the options open to tackle piracy, perhaps some of the challenges, as we've already heard. And what we will see is, unless steps are taken, then with these increasing streaming services coming online, things will only get worse rather than better. So with this in mind, Adi, I'll turn to you first. You're based here in the region. You've had a number of successes. What have you seen over the last 12 months since you spoke at this event last year?
Well, there's been a lot of activity. And when I say that, you've seen a change in the trends, whether it's from a consumer point of view, or whether it's from a business point of view, or whether it's from the courts, whether it's the way the law has been interpreted over the last 12 months. We've seen that change come in. We've seen more and more participation from the content owners. They've invested heavily in content protection activities. We've seen the collaboration which has been going on. It's suddenly picked up really well. We've got the likes of Google, Facebook, etc. Everyone is trying to work together because everyone is impacted at some point or the other. If you speak about this region, it's people are not used to paying for content. They're used to. It's not a concept where a platform like OSN, let's say, we're a pay TV platform, and we're not affordable for a large population in the region. There's a lack of awareness of how much we pay for that content, for example. It's a lot of money. And there's a diverse sort of population in the region. There are a lot of expats, especially in the GCC countries. And they come from different countries. They have different ways of accessing content. They have different likes when it comes to content. And so our task was first to ensure that in the last 12 months, we managed to initiate these awareness campaigns as much as possible. You need to keep that alive. That cannot die. So there is this concept in the region now, to some extent, that this particular piece of content is probably, if it's free on the internet, it's probably illegal. However, we're still at a stage where we're trying to educate, whether it's within the business or outside the business as consumers, whether this particular activity of accessing the content free from the internet, is it ethical? Now courts cannot decide that. Courts can only decide on the legality and illegality of that aspect. And that's been going on very well. And it's not just limited to the court. So when we enforce our rights, first of all, it starts in-house, where we protect our content, as using the latest technology, working with our partners, etc. And then we have the option of enforcing our rights through administrative means. We don't want to go to the courts. We don't want to go to file criminal complaints. There was a question, probably a statement also made this morning. Why are we going to the? Why do we always have to initiate criminal complaints? But I just wanted to clarify that part, where we don't really only have the option of going with a criminal action, but we have the other options as well, which is to initiate administrative actions, as well as to create awareness around that. So when we do these, this is part of our strategy, and we would like to create that awareness as much as possible without using the criminal means. We tend to use the criminal means where we see that this particular pirate, or this is not a casual pirate, and they are in fact using these activities to make money. So, in the last 12 months, we've managed to kind of cover to this to a large extent, where we've discussed this with the authorities. We need a public-private partnership. We need to collaborate across the industry. We need to come together as one industry. We need to educate the people that you're not simply pirating the content or stealing something from a big, rich entity or company. There are a lot of jobs which are associated with it. So it's not a victimless crime as such.
Well, and I guess, some of these people you've succeeded against, more often than not, it's not one-man bands. There could be organised crime behind
Correct.
them as well.
Way back in, let's say 2014, we had this movie, Taken 3, pirated from our platform the day we had put it there. And it just got very complicated because of those cross-border issue. But finally, we tracked it down. we found the admin, we got a judgment from the Abu Dhabi courts. So the law has not really changed since then, but the way it was interpreted was fantastic because then again, this morning there was coming back to that criminal point of view and the criminal judge sitting there, we went to an IP specialized court in Abu Dhabi, so that is available. We don't have to go file a criminal case. We can, initiate these proceedings before an IP specialized court, which has a set of expert witnesses who look into these matters, who understand what we are talking about, who understand how this evidence is presented, and present it before the court in a summarized, in a legal language form, and then the judgments are given. So over the years, we've seen more and more of these actions across the region, whether it's Jordan, where we've got servers raided, whether it's Egypt, whether it's UAE, whether it's Kuwait, we've seen that happening. So it's not, the courts have interpreted the law in the right spirit without us asking for an amendment in the law, which to some extent is required to clarify things for the public at large. But when it comes to us initiating any administrative or an IP specialized crime case, we don't really need that sort of amendment.
Thank you. So, I guess what you're saying that the laws need to change. The laws are, for example, the UAE copyright laws 2002, 15, 17 years old now. But that's not restricting the judges, provided that they can apply the law in accordance with the spirit of it, as streaming didn't exist in 2002. But perhaps if I can just move on to Amit, because as I touched on in the bio, Amit, you've looked at and you've been heavily involved in changing the law in India as well. But perhaps you can just give us a flavour of the last 12 months outside the region from an Indian perspective.
Sure. So, John, I'm conscious that I'm at the centre of the table. We're 4 lawyers, and this is our last session. And we're between lunch. So I'm going to try to make it as interesting as possible. Couple of things. I'm going to get the slides out and give you a couple of statistics in India. And the gentleman earlier who spoke, we'll go to slide 2 if that's okay. Yes. Right. India has changed. And before I get into the slide, I want to say a couple of points. India is a country of 1 billion people. The penetration is very large because the average viewership on handheld access is between the age of 15 to 25. A pirate is always clever. And a pirate only gets smarter by the day. What is it that you can do and what is it that you must do? In the last 12 months, and most of the colleagues here who spoke earlier and even Aditya, India is a country that makes 400 mainstream films and 400 regional films. So it's about 800 films. 1 billion people, age group of 15 and 25, everybody wants to not pay for content. And you know what's better? Broadband in India is getting free. So our problems are plenty, but I think India has evolved ever since. It's evolved in the last 12 months. I would say there's been a sea change, and particularly in the last 2 years. What is it that's happened in India? And before I get into that, I'd like to just show some statistics. Now, if you look at this slide, India ranks number 5. I love the economy, but number 5 on online piracy. And I've given you the reason why and the rationale why. The Indian music industry, as one of my colleagues mentioned earlier, the loss of revenue every year is colossal. That's why you have the Savans of the world, you have the Ganas of the world, and you have Jio collaborating, because they've realized that there has to be some way to regulate that. So if you look at how the music industry evolved in India, and now when we look at OTT platforms in India, you have Netflix, you have Apple, you have Hotstar, you have all the usual suspects there, are taking this very seriously. So what's happening in the Indian context? There are 3 fundamental things that are happening. First, from an industry perspective, we have the Broadcasting Federation in India, and you have the Television and Producers Guild, who I represent. I represent both these guys. have come together at the as an industry, and that's extremely important in any region, whether it's any guild across the world. You need people and original content creators to go out and feel and mitigate that risk, and therefore have policy in place. So these guys have come out very strong with regulation, are able to admonish people. Second, and the most important thing, is statute. You said 2003, your copyright law here. I was a part of the Select Committee of Parliament in 2012 in India when the law changed. We went to Parliament, we saw that. We brought about a change in our Certification Act. I don't call it the Censorship Act anymore, I'll call it certification. We've done far too many things there. And we were able to get an amendment to that act, which bill post-elections will be through. So you're having Copyright Act amended, not with just, like my colleague said, just not criminal action, but both civil and criminal action. So that's on the statute front, one is on the industry front. And the third most important part is court intervention. Courts in India are dynamic. And I'm pleased to share with you that last week I was able to get an order, typically known as a dynamic injunction, where we were not only blocking, not just removing the websites and blocking content or blocking the website, but by virtue of such an order, every time there was any recurrence, we didn't need to go out and file a fresh plaint. So that's what Indian courts are doing. They're dynamic in terms of thought process. And that's what we need legislation to catch up with technology. Like I said, the pirate is always smarter and he's very clever. The question is he clever by half, and are we going to get to that or not? So that's happening on the court front, which is the judicial front. I think, on a more moralistic view, I think it's changing because Indian providers also are realizing that they want to watch genuine content. People are more, regimental about it. So I think these are the changes that we're seeing. John, interestingly, Avengers releases on Friday. Now, you must know that there are jurisdictions where there are going to be 24-hour screenings for a film like Avengers. Now, you must understand the appetite for this and what it can do. We were the guys who went and got a genre order for Dark Knight. So even Hollywood studios out of India in different jurisdictions went out and got protection. I would say go to the courts, not selling for lawyers to you, but telling you that please engage lawyers wherever you want to. It's absolutely necessary. And come as an industry together. Get the regulator on your side. The Telecom Regulatory Authority in India has played a very, very vital role in mitigating this. So these are just some of the thoughts from an India perspective. I don't want to say anything more, but I'm happy to take questions, but that's where we are. I hope we can do more in this region. This region in India is forever one, so content is universal. I was in LA about 2 weeks ago. All platforms want content. You want to watch a Narcos, you want to watch Arabic content. It's all universal today. So protecting that content is really the mantra, and that's what you need to do.
Thank you. So collaboration.
Collaboration, yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. I mentioned earlier before we sat on the panel that reading through a number of commentaries coming out of the US and commentators there say, laws need to change in the US. The US itself doesn't believe it's at the forefront of this. And the area of the world that the US is looking to is Europe. So I wonder on that, Nikki, if I could hand over to you and ask what you're seeing in Europe for the last 12 months, please.
Yeah, of course. And indeed internationally, I suppose. I can give a little bit of an overview. So the first thing that I'm seeing is a lot more criminal enforcement. I think somebody from the floor made a very perceptive point a little bit earlier, which was the difficulty sometimes in getting law enforcement and the judiciary to engage with these kind of crimes, with intellectual property crimes, when obviously they have a lot of competing priorities and violent crimes and very difficult crimes that are competing for attention. But what I have seen, particularly over the course of the last 3 months, a number of really quite significant criminal enforcement actions where terms of imprisonment have been imposed and quite significant fines. Looking specifically at the Netherlands, a couple of cases in the US, the 2 cases that John mentioned in the UK, There was a very big raid and enforcement in Spain recently, South Korea, Germany, Thailand, and even in China. Somebody was recently sentenced to 3 years imprisonment in China. So I think all of that is very encouraging. Obviously, there are advantages to us as rights holders of going down the criminal enforcement route, not least because criminal enforcement investigators have powers of investigation which far exceed anything in the private sector, and they're able to get access to information that we just legally can't get hold of. So that's the first thing that I would highlight. Thinking about the political arena and changes in legislation, obviously Article 17 of the Copyright Directive is something that's been debated extensively over the course of the last year to 18 months in the EU and has just been passed through trilogue. And it's a bit of a curate's egg. I wouldn't say that it's wholly without problems for us as rights holders. But what it will mean is that the safe harbour provisions that some of these sort of, I don't want to call particular services out by name, but I think you all know who I'm talking about. So some of the provisions that they've relied on, they're not going to be able to hide behind any longer. And as Amit mentioned, site blocking injunctions, again, that's just becoming easier. And I think there are about 31 or 32 countries internationally where it's now possible either to get a dynamic injunction, as Amit discussed, or static injunctions. And then I suppose the third thing to call out is I'm just saying that vendor offers just continue to improve. I'm constantly being pitched new ideas, new technology. The price of vendor offers is coming down, and it just feels much more accessible.
Thank you. Thank you. No, as a lawyer based here in Dubai, we have to attend training each year. I have a session tomorrow. The one I attended 6 weeks ago, they made the point clear that the area of industry that's been affected most by technology is the legal trade at the moment. So you're probably looking at the last set of lawyers of this generation, perhaps, before computers and AI take over, if you believe the legal press. Waleed, if I can come to you to ask that, so, in order to take these actions, ownership can be important. You need to prove that you have the rights or the license to enforce those rights. And I think your colleague, Dr. Refat, set you up earlier around DRM and the joined-up database. Perhaps you can just give us some more views around that, please.
In the past, the main problem we have is the authentication. For example, I will talk about Egypt as a main producer for the Arabic content, movies and series. In the past, we have a lot of places or institutions dealing with authentication or notarizing the ownership documents. For example, we have the Egyptian Chamber of Cinema, which is the main place or institution who is responsible of notarizing the ownership and having the chain of ownership. But simultaneously, the people who are dealing with pirates, they use any of two pirates can go to the notary public and me notarizing you to broadcast 1,000 movie. But in these days, the notary public doesn't even care about looking for the chain of ownership of if I'm the correct owner. So we put kind of pressure in the government in Egypt. And finally, we succeed to prevent all the notary public or any other place or institution in Egypt to dealing or handling any notarization for the Arabic content. And now, for example, for movies, you have only one place you can get an authorized document from the Chamber of Cinema for movies and from the Egyptian censorship for series and songs, and also the Ministry of Culture. That's why today no one from the pirates are able to pretend or to make an excuse that they do, or they was naive, and they do have notarized documents that from someone in the world, and they have ownership documents or a license, or they are being licensed by anyone, because there is only one source, and this source is known to everyone, and no other places can deal or notarizing or getting or issue notarized documents to anyone except the particular places or an institution in Egypt that are responsible of authenticate the ownership of the Arabic content.
Okay. What about content, say Arabic content, perhaps created here in the UAE, that's going to Egypt? How would you deal with that under this system?
For example, let's talk about Arabic movies.
Yeah.
Here, the authority here in UAE, they already have instructions or a kind of mutual agreements that they cannot release any Arabic movie without a certificate from the Egyptian Chamber of Cinema. Okay. Which is, I think it's a success and good step in our fight versus piracy.
Okay, thank you. And so Dr. Rafal, I think it was, touched on the centralized database, which I think is something you would like to touch on as well.
Yes, yes. As you know, for example, I will get back to the movies. All the Arabic movies we have is approximate 4,000 and a half movie. 500 from those movies are already lost in somewhere in the world. But the remaining titles are mostly splitting between ART and Rutan. So we work together, we and Rutana and ART work to unify the place, are responsible of authentication of the Arabic content ownership. Simultaneously, also, we are working on getting a verdict orders from the court to assure our own ownership on our content, to prevent anyone to pretend in the future that they have any kind of ownership or has been licensed by anyone on our content, because it was one of the things that one of the biggest problem we have when we deal with the satellite. When we send claim or file claim to any satellite, they used to told us, our client is totally naive, and you have ownership documents, and they have ownership documents, and I'm not a court. I'm not allowed to give a verdict or to prove which one of you is the correct owner. Now, no one are able to submit ownership documents except the correct owner of the content.
And have you found this is leading to results for you already? So are you finding piracy is starting to drop off in these cases?
Sorry?
Are you finding that this is having success for you, having this system in place?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. At least for as a start. And also we have some success with the government. I will talk to you.
Okay. Mabruk. So again, collaboration seems to be the key words. And perhaps if I can very quickly just come on to some of the coalitions. So Adi, if I can start with yourself, what ways do you find that rights holders are working together to try and tackle piracy head on?
See, the idea behind such coalition is to overcome challenges. And if I were to name some of these challenges, it's basically on documentation, on proving the ownership, on being a licensee, legitimate licensee, on having implemented the best possible technological protection and still having that stolen from you. Obviously, then there's a question about jurisdiction, expertise in terms of what we're looking at and how do we deal with it. Numerous times there are certain platforms, if you're talking about search engines or social media platforms, you cannot just simply go after them, send them legal notices or go to the court, etc. So need of the hour is obviously to collaborate and share the information so that the process evolves. So we have this DMCA legislation which has evolved over time where we are now able to send notifications to ISPs, etc. for takedowns. Then we have the takedown forms which have evolved again. These takedown forms are probably, I'm referring to Facebook and YouTube, etc. So, you know, they've evolved because of discussions, and these discussions happen at different forums. So OSN, for example, we've reached out to different rights holders, broadcasters around the world. Within the region, we have a MENA free-to-air coalition. Rotana Embassy are members of that, so is Discovery. So we bring in people from outside. Bean is a member, even though they're competitors. It's important that we come together and collaborate, share information, talk about things, have an informal charter. We bring in members such as satellite operators, etc. So they're across the table and we can share our concerns. We can talk about the law, we can talk about what we can do together, and that it makes business sense for everyone, isn't it? So if I were to give you examples of specific coalitions we are members of, there's Free-to-Air Coalition is one. Then we are members of the MEA IPTV Task Force that's specifically focused on pirate IPTV services. And we also look at other services such as Cody boxes, etc. within that forum. We are also members of APA, which is a coalition essentially of major broadcasters around the world. Through APA, we work with Interpol and Europol, where there's a cross-border issue, where there are issues we need to deal with, which are against people or services which are not based out of this region, but are probably using services or headquartered in Europe somewhere or North America. So it's important to work within that coalition, to have that impact when we lobby for things with Interpol and Europol. And that has in turn brought in ideas and best practices to this region, where Europol and Interpol, when they conduct workshops, they ensure that we are also talking about copyright and anti-piracy activities, rather than simply being focused on economic crimes and counterfeit goods, etc. Then we work directly with the Hollywood studios, with the MPA, etc., which is not really a coalition as such, but it's a contractual relationship. Although they are not obliged to come together as that, but it makes businesses, like I said, to use the full extent of law, to use the provisions in the contract, to work together, to share information.
Thank you. Yeah. Perhaps just a general question for the panel, following on from the panel a little earlier with the dreaded C word of cost. Perhaps I can ask, in working as part of these coalitions or with other rights holders, do you find that's a way of managing cost, particularly legal spend? I see Nikki nodding there.
Yeah.
Yeah, please.
No, I'm absolutely nodding. I mean, generally, most of these pirate services that we're coming across, they're carrying content from more than one rights holder. And, you know, it doesn't make sense for just one of us to be proceeding. And certainly the things that we've been involved in recently have generally been via either the MEA IPTV's task force, which Adi mentioned, or the Alliance of Creativity and Entertainment, which Discovery are also members of. So yes, from an enforcement point of view, that is obviously the way to go. And just looking at other bits of work that we've tended to do in coalition with other rights holders. So landscaping work and research is quite a big piece of work that we tend to do. And looking at the NCTA, which is a an industry group in the States that Discovery are members of. They've done a huge amount of work in terms of profiling why do people consume pirated content, what are the drivers, what are the things that you could put in place, how could you structure your service maybe to make it less attractive. What kind of things can you do to stop credential sharing? You know, what makes people less likely to want to credential share? And also, what kind of things deter the pirates themselves? And then I think the third piece of work, which we tend to do in coalition with other rights holders, relates to the sort of government influence or the political sphere. And so, for example, the Special 301 process and the USTR recently, certainly in this area, I know submissions went in relation to the BRQ service. Submissions went in relation to Thailand and that part of the world from a coalition of rights holders. Notorious markets, which comes up in the fall, is another opportunity for rights holders to do that kind of work. And in Europe, DG Trade is also calling for submissions about IP crime-related issues. And that's something that I think various rights holders will be getting together to address by the end of May.
Okay, thank you. It almost sounds as though to me with all these acronyms, we need a coalition of the coalitions.
Yes, indeed.
To make sure that all these coalitions actually work together, though I guess having shared membership, that helps a lot.
Indeed.
Amit, is there anything you'd like to add on this?
Yes, you mentioned about costs. And I think the one thing that we've seen is because of statutory implications, like in India, we have under the Information Technology Act, a cyber cell. Now they are able to mitigate and reduce costs because you don't ever so often need to go to court. So I think policing is very, very important. Making the industry collaborate with the authorities is the fastest way of saving cost, mitigating risk, and actually having deterrent value in terms of pirates. Because pirates will always be scared if there is deterrent action. And I think that's what we've seen. Like I said, last week I had somebody go in for simple imprisonment for 6 months because he had gone out and created a website which was not just an impersonation, but far and more beyond that in terms of services. So the court stepped in, summoned the defendant. It's not like a genre order or a gag order. It's really getting people out, making them realize. And it's cost effective now. So in India, we have service providers who are able to identify the ISP, who are able to tell us and track, and who do this as a business model along with lawyers at a very, very cost-effective basis. And that's the collaboration, and I think that's how it's going to be. And globally, that's what it's going to be. The challenge, John, and Aditya and Nikki, is that we internationally, and I'll give you an example. If there is a rogue website which is based out of any jurisdiction which is not in Asia, I go out and get an order. Implementing that order is extremely difficult. Policing that order, and that's what's happening ever so often, because that's what pirates do. You would be in South America, for all you care, where I may not be able to go and get an order, or even have reciprocity. So I think, like the WIPO, and like how we have a IP regime which is international, it's very important for anti-piracy, which is the movement we've started as discussion back in Burbank, in LA, and in Mumbai, that's what we need to do for content providers, that we are able to go out and get that in any jurisdiction that we want to. For God's sake, if it's Maldives, for God's sake, if it's Mauritius, whichever, back and beyond, but you should be able to get that.
Thank you. So very quickly on this section, Walid, is there anything you would like to add on collaboration or working with other rights owners or governments?
Concerning the awareness about piracy, I will, one of the gentlemen was talking about Morocco. And I had an experience in the past that I go to Fes. Fes is one of Moroccan cities, and I sat with one of the content provider in Fes. On the old shelves, I found our content has been pirated by this content provider, and he was proud of himself that I'm not dealing with piracy. I hate pirates. In his awareness that piracy means that you sold the other content without logo. But as long as he put his logo on my content, it means for him that he's not a pirate. So one of our struggles or one of our plans should be the awareness about the IP rights. In Tunisia, for example, in the States, they have cinema theater every day, new cinema theater every day. But in a country like Tunisia, they close a cinema theater a month. They are shrinking because people doesn't care anymore to go to cinema because the movie, they have a CD, get it from the street for a new movie, and they doesn't even imagine that this is piracy. So all the coalition should be work on those countries, because the bullet used to be came from Tunisia, from such countries who have no clue about IP rights. This is, I think, what we should work on it, because I could be in Dubai and the bullet came to my chest from Somalia, because the people there doesn't even know they are making piracy. That's why we should use our coalitions to distribute the awareness about piracy.
So hopefully that can be the next agenda point for the next coalition meeting, how to increase and raise awareness to the public.
Yes.
And also, as we've touched on, that this isn't a victimless crime. All you in this room are probably victims of this crime to one degree or another. Therefore, we do need to educate consumers that, you know, people are suffering with this. And also, as we've touched on already, more often than not, it's leading to organised crime behind the scenes as well. And I think it was from the first panel where I think one of the panelists mentioned about giving credit card information, and perhaps that's something to reinforce that who are you giving your credit card information to, and where else is that likely to be used? So it's these perhaps simple points to try and get across to consumers in the way they may more readily understand that this is something that must be stopped and shouldn't be supported. So we've touched on some of the legal points. Perhaps if I can come to you, Nikki, on say some of the other steps businesses could take or stakeholders could take to redefine their business models to actually look at ways of, say, making piracy ineffective.
Well, that's a really interesting question, isn't it? I mean, it's obviously something that one of the earlier panels discussed in quite some detail, and I agree with a lot of the points that were made by some of those panelists. I would just say, though, that the pirates and the legal providers are just not playing by the same rules, and it's just not as simple as changing your legal business model to reflect the pirated one. I mean, obviously, as legitimate content holders and broadcasters, we're constrained by regulatory and compliance issues in the territories. We're constrained by the rights which we have actually been able to acquire, which may well be geographically limited. On a purely commercial basis, we're never going to be able to compete with the pirate services in terms of price or the range of content which we're going to be able to provide. Because they're clearly not paying for their content. I do think that there is a piece of work to be done in terms of differentiating our offer, though, and ensuring that maybe price and range are not the only, or even maybe the main criteria on which the competition is based. You know, I think we can differentiate in terms of integrity of content. I think we can differentiate in terms of the reliability of the service. In terms of cyber safety, I think these are all issues that we absolutely can differentiate on and important areas that we can set ourselves apart on. But I have to say, I mean, looking at some of the significant pirate problems, you know, touched briefly on BRQ, I don't think it was their business model which has led to their service being pirated. And I think we can say that for a lot of the services that are existing at the moment. It's not really to do with the business model.
Yep, thank you. Amit, is there anything you would like to add on this at all?
Well, on a business model, I think the most fundamental thing is, like he said, awareness is one part. But I think business regimes are sort of grappling with 2 or 3 fundamental issues when you talk about piracy, because piracy is theft as a synonym. But there are far more intelligent arguments that business houses have to deal with. And we deal with them on a daily basis. One is the issue of what is pirated content? What's the argument of fair use? What's the argument of public domain? These are some of the issues that business houses need to dispel, and we need to educate them from a legal point of view, because I think that's something that's happening. But let me tell you this, I think all businesses, keeping the novelty of original content and making sure that it's sort of sanitized all through is the challenge to the last mile operator. The dollar gets lost because you have people in the last mile trying to do what they can do and make bucks. I think aggregation of content, one of the things that I heard in the earlier session is when you look at the Indian regime, and I'll just very quickly tell you that every broadcaster started aggregating content. That was one of the ways to mitigate it, because then you really took the middleman out. I think it's about taking the middleman out wherever possible. It's not to take anyone's livelihood away, but it's the middleman that creates the problem. And I think that's the business model that you need to do. And that's what studios are doing, and that's what broadcasters will continue to do. So I think that's really the mantra.
Thank you. Adi, anything to add?
I mean, Nikki and Amit have pretty much covered it. I just wanted to add that, also, going back to what was said in the morning, I mean, there's been this talk about, OTT is the way forward, this and that, but if you look at the Indian subcontinent and the Middle East in particular, look at the demographics and the access to internet and the age groups and their interest in particular sort of content and the way they access content. Businesses have tried to address that part where you say, let's make it easily available. So that's been an evolution where you try to simplify the way you present content, you market content, and you make it available through different platforms. We at OSN, we've seen a whole lot of challenges. So there are some consumers in particular jurisdictions who don't have access to fast internet, or internet is expensive. They would want to access content in a particular way. Within their household, the older generation would prefer to watch it simply on a television set by flicking the channel numbers they're familiar with. The younger lot would, if they are looking for a particular content, and if they don't want to pay for it, and if they're casually pirating it, if there's less internet penetration there, or the speed of internet is not very high, includes India as well, they would download it. They won't live stream it, because then they don't have enough speed to do that. So that's one. So if you're talking about what a business is doing, it's like they're probably identified, okay, this is my market, this is my target audience, and this is what I need to sell. Again, going back to the statement which had come in from Yup TV, they are a very niche platform. It's a very niche content they market. Going back few years, we've done enforcement activities across labor camps around the region, including countries like UAE, Kuwait, Saudi, etc. And then we sold them our commercial subscriptions on a discounted rate, because we know these people will not be able to afford a particular commercial rate for those. We clubbed together a group of channels according to the demographics of that labor camp, and we did that. Over time, the way they consume content is changed. Now they want an IPTV decoder, and that's probably where they want apps, etc. That's probably a market for Yuck TV to get into with their sort of content they have. So there is a lot of scope for all sorts of businesses here. They can have exclusivity on that sort of content. We maintain exclusivity on Western and Arabic and other sort of content. MEA is maintaining exclusivity on sports content. Everyone's got this, the way they present content, they want people to access content which is beneficial to both the consumers and the business.
So again, it comes back to education as well, I guess, educating consumers. Part of the non-legal strategy is education. Perhaps if I could just ask you, Waleed, on Rotana. So you mentioned yourself a little earlier that making people aware that this is a crime, they shouldn't be doing it. What is Rotana doing around that?
Let me explain first what we used to face in the past. As a content provider, we used to trace the pirates, and sometimes we use in the physical distribution in the past. I'm talking about 20 years ago or something. We used to use, sometimes we used to use the bodyguards to attack the pirates' places and destroy the tracks they have to pirate our content. And when there is a kind of, we used to build up a case and coordinate with the censorship police. We helped them to file a good lawsuits. And finally, we stuck with a judge with a radical beliefs. He, according to his understand, that he cannot put someone behind bars because of pirating a movie. He can put him in behind bar if he steal a bicycle.
Yeah.
But a movie cost millions. According to his beliefs, he cannot put someone behind bars because of pirating a movie. Nowadays, we coordinate with the Egyptian government, and according to these efforts, we succeed to have a new IP or a pirate law, including with 45 articles, including with prisonership. Now, whatever the judge believes, or he is now committed with punishment to put those guys behind bars, or in the past we didn't have this, but now I think this is a kind of success to protect, because as long as you are not face a punishment, you will misbehave. But now I think in the coming few months, I think we will see a kind of progress in fighting piracy, especially in Egypt.
Excellent.
Yes.
Well, we look forward to seeing that.
Yes.
Hope it's a huge success.
John?
I'm just looking at the time. Yeah, we have about 5 minutes left. Before I open to questions, I think there was just one question to ask of all of you, if you wouldn't mind. In a short number of words, what would be your request to make your job easier in enforcing your company or your clients' rights? So what is it you would like to help you in this fight?
I began by saying that there is a need to extend the administrative actions ambit of that.
More cost effective?
Yes. So right now, I think this is very unique to UAE and Kuwait when I say this. We've sort of worked on an administrative process for website blocking. We are now trying to extend that to cyberlockers, etc. So there's been some lobbying around that. There's been partnerships around that. We've worked with the local telcos. We work with other broadcasters. We've come together. We're now asking for a process. The day we start going to the courts for site blocking, we will set that trend, that precedent, where we've tried to overcome that argument with the regulators in the region that this is covered within your policy. You have every right to do that, and we have every right to ask for it. So, we need to establish that public-private partnership in an administrative form. The lawyers will still be involved because it is coming out from copyright. It's a part of law. It's IP.
Thank you.
The business needs that. Yeah.
Thanks, Amit.
Aditya, we will make it cost effective. No, I think priority is my word. From our clients and from business houses, what we expect from a lawyering perspective is that you treat this as your top priority. Every important studio, every production house, every content provider, every platform must make this a priority as much as revenue generation is. And as long as if you don't make this a priority, then just forget about piracy. So my mantra would be, please treat this as top priority for you. Have a dedicated cell of people who only do this and invest in this. And you'll have rich rewards on this, and you're helping the industry. That's what I would say.
Anything to add, Nikki, from your point of view?
I mean, I think for a very large number of years, the audiovisual industry has been trying to find ways of getting the message out to the end user and the consumers of piracy. And I'm not sure we've actually hit on that magic bullet. So if you had a magic wand, John, and could wave it, what I would like is for us to be able to find ways of persuading the viewers that these pirate services are not interchangeable with the legal offer. Whether that's in terms of reliability or just making the message that it's not a victimless crime resonate.
Thank
But
you.
how we do that, I don't know.
Walid, anything for you?
I think we should target first the content provider. The way of first release is the way of pirating the content. If you succeed to control the first way or first step to release the content, you will protect. For example, Nilesat have a suggestion and provided to the movie producers in Egypt to broadcast the movies such as in the States, to broadcast the movies via satellite to protect their content from being pirated. Most of the producers refused the idea because of a penny. They will gonna pay to Nilesat to control the broadcast of the movies. They refused because of the cost. They didn't see the losses they have. Or, for example, the cinema production was one of the national income once a day in Egypt. Now this industry about to be dying in Egypt because of piracy. But the producer doesn't see this. They doesn't have the vision to understand that they should cooperate. They should make a lot of investment in fighting piracy. So the main source is controlling the first release of the content will reduce the number of piracy.
Thank you. Well, please join me in thanking your panel before we open to questions. The reason being one of the panelists has to run for a plane any second. Amit, you're looking...
I'm happy to take any quick questions. But before that, ladies and gentlemen, we've been in discussions and I've seen the sessions through the morning. I'd like you to put your hands together for Jaya and her team. They've put a fantastic show. Please do that, ladies. It's a lot of hard work. We've been to many of them, but I think this was very qualitative. So over to you.
Thank you.
Questions.